Welcome back. If you are just joining us for the first time, where have you been? And if you have been here since part 1, you already know. You already know that Maya Carter did not plan any of this. She did not plan the wrong car. She did not plan the Han family estate. She did not plan to walk into a wedding with no bride and hold 500 people together like she had been doing it her whole life. She did not plan Han Jiwon. But here is what Maya Carter did not know yet. The hardest part was not the wedding. The hardest part was not the board dinner. The hardest part was staying professional in a house that was starting to feel like somewhere she belonged. When we left part 1, Maya had just finished her first dinner with the Han family. The food was warm, the conversation was real, and Han Jiwon had looked at her across that table in a way that she was choosing very carefully not to think about. But someone else at that table had noticed. Someone with bright eyes and a big personality and absolutely zero intention of keeping what she noticed to herself. His sister, Han Jiwon. And that conversation, the one that happened on the terrace after dinner, with 2 glasses of wine and the Georgia night pressing warm around them, that conversation was about to change the way Maya looked at everything, including herself, including him. Part 2 is here, and I need you to understand something before we begin. Maya Carter came to this estate with nothing to lose. But somewhere between the rose garden and the library with the rolling ladder and the man who said her name like he was making a note of it for later, she started to have something. And that is the most dangerous thing that could have happened to a woman who was supposed to be leaving. Stay with me, because part 2 of his contract wife ran away on their wedding day starts right now. After dinner, Jiwon found her on the terrace. The evening was warm in the way Georgia evenings were warm in May. Not the punishing heat of summer yet, but something softer, carrying the smell of the garden and the sound of whatever was living in the trees beyond the estate's edge. Maya had come out to breathe and to process and to have 5 minutes with her own thoughts before the day finished. Jiwon came and stood beside her at the terrace railing with a glass of wine in each hand and extended one without asking, which Maya was beginning to understand was a Han family trait. The assumption of hospitality, the bypassing of the offering and declining ritual. You don't have to take it, Jiwon said. I want it, Maya said, and took it. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, which told Maya something about Jiwon, that she could do silence when she wanted to, that the energy she filled rooms with was a choice rather than a compulsion. He told me what happened, Jiwon said. The real version, not the version for the board. Wrong car, you ended up here, you held the whole day together. She paused. He didn't have to tell me you were impressive. I could hear it in how he described it. He described it? He's my brother, Jiwon said. He called me at 11 last night, which he never does, and he told me about a woman who took her shoes off in the rose garden and made him tell her something true about himself. She looked at Maya sidelong. He told you about the relief. Maya was quiet. He's never said that to anyone, Jiwon said. Not dramatically, just factually. He's been carrying that since 6 this morning, and he told you by the afternoon. She sipped her wine. I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable. I just want you to know what that means, coming from him. Jiwon. I know, she said. It's a week. You're here professionally. You're going to New York. She waved a hand that suggested she was not dismissing these facts but simply setting them aside for the moment. I'm just saying. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean, and he doesn't tell people true things easily, and he told you both. Maya looked out at the garden. He's a complicated person to know, Jiwon said quietly. He makes it look very simple from the outside. Competent, composed, everything under control. But she paused, choosing. There's a person in there who has been doing the right thing for so long that he's not entirely sure what the thing he actually wants looks like. The garden was dark now except for the landscape lighting, soft pools of gold on the grass. Why are you telling me this? Maya said. Jiwon was quiet for a moment. Because you're not impressed by the house, she said. I watched you walk into the guest house and look at it like it was nice, like you appreciated it, but like it didn't change anything about who you were. That's rare around here. Most people who walk into our world either want something from it or feel like they have to prove they belong in it. You just... She tilted her head. You just are. Maya looked at her. I work in fashion in New York, Jion said. I have seen approximately 10,000 women in the past 5 years navigate wealthy spaces, and I know the ones who are real within 30 seconds. She smiled. You're real. Your brother said I was real in the wrong car going the wrong direction, Maya said. It seems to run in the family. Jion laughed. A real one, surprised out of her. Oh, I like you, she said. I like you a lot. She was in bed by 10. The linen sheets were exactly what they'd looked like they'd be, and the room was dark in the way that rooms with good curtains were dark, and the fountain in the courtyard made a sound that was the precise frequency of something that slowed your thoughts down whether you wanted them slowed or not. Maya lay in the dark and thought carefully about where she was. She was in a guest house that cost more per square foot than anywhere she'd ever lived. She had signed a contract that would cover her for the next year if she managed it well. She was here to do a job, to stand beside a man at a board dinner and demonstrate the stability his board needed to see, to coordinate the social logistics of a difficult week with her professional skills fully engaged. That was the thing she was here to do. She was not here to notice the way Han Jaiwan said her name. She was not here to be moved by the fact that he'd said I felt relief to a stranger in a rose garden and apparently hadn't said it to anyone else. She was not here to let Jion's words settle in her chest and take root. She had been burned by a man she had trusted with 3 years of herself, and the ash was barely cool. She was not here for any of that. She was here to do a job, get paid, go to New York, start over. That's the plan, she told herself. The plan is good. Stick to the plan. She was asleep within 10 minutes, the fountain keeping its time in the courtyard, the Georgia night pressing warm and soft against the windows, the climbing roses on the east wall moving slightly in a breeze she couldn't feel from inside. In the main house, in the library where he went when he needed to think, Han Jaiwan sat with a book open in his lap that he had not read a single word of for the past 40 minutes. He was thinking about a woman who read contracts twice and took her shoes off in rose gardens and asked for true things like they were a reasonable request. He was thinking about the fact that his day, which had started with the worst morning of the past several years, had ended at a dinner table that felt more like a family than the one that had been scheduled, the one with 500 guests and a ceremony and a bride chosen by committee. He was thinking about how that was information, about himself, about what he wanted, about the distance between the life he had been building and the life he might actually want to be living. He closed the book. He did not reach for his phone. He did not call Sungjin or the lawyer or his mother. He sat in the library that his grandmother had built and looked at the east wall of her books and thought about a woman down the garden path who had said, "Your grandmother sounds like she was a smart woman," in a voice that understood something about grandmothers and what they leave behind. He thought about 1 week. He thought about New York. He thought about how he was a man who was very good at knowing what the right thing was and very practiced at doing it, and how the right thing right now was to keep this exactly what it was. Professional, defined, bounded by the contract that he had written very carefully to include every condition she had named, because he was a man who paid attention to what people needed, and he had understood immediately that she needed to feel that this was her choice, entirely, with no pressure and no obligation and no expectation beyond what she had agreed to. He would keep it that way. He was extraordinarily good at doing the right thing. He picked the book back up. He still didn't read it. Han Young-soo was already in the garden at 7 in the morning. Maya saw him from the guesthouse kitchen window while she was making coffee. A man in his early 60s moving through the rose garden with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who owned not just the land but the hour itself. He was tall like his son, with silver threading through dark hair, dressed simply in slacks and a light jacket that somehow still managed to look like authority. She had been briefed on him. She had taken notes on him. She had thought she was prepared for him. She took her coffee and went outside anyway, because hiding in the guesthouse was not something Maya Carter did, and because she had learned long ago that the people you prepared hardest for were always better met head-on. He noticed her before she reached the garden path. Of course he did. She had a feeling Han Young-soo noticed everything before it reached him. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Han." She stopped at a respectful distance, close enough to be direct, far enough to be appropriate. "Good morning." He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at architectural plans, thoroughly, without rushing, finding both the strengths and the load-bearing questions. You're up early. I'm always up early before an event week, she said. Helps me think. An event week, he repeated, and something in the way he said it told her he was testing the framing, turning it over. That's how I approach my work, she said evenly. Every engagement has a goal, a timeline, and a set of people who need to leave feeling like something went right. This week is no different. He studied her. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A pause that was its own kind of answer. Something more temporary, he said finally. Maya held his gaze. I am temporary, Mr. Han. I've been clear about that with your son. But temporary doesn't mean careless. I take every job seriously, for as long as it lasts. Something shifted in his expression. Barely. The way a foundation shifted, not visible on the surface but registering in the structure. My son tells me you managed yesterday well, he said. Your son managed yesterday well, she said. I just made sure the pieces around him were in order. Han Young-soo looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at his roses with the expression of a man quietly revising something. Join me, he said. It was not quite a request. She joined him. They walked the garden for 20 minutes and he asked her questions that sounded like conversation and functioned like an interview. Where was she from? What had she built? Where was she going? She answered everything directly, the way she always did, without performing humility and without overclaiming either. Just the truth laid out clean. He asked about New York. Fresh start, she said. From what? From something that wasn't working, she said. I believe in knowing when to close a chapter. He glanced at her sidelong. So does my son, he said quietly. He has not always been allowed to practice it. She didn't respond to that. It wasn't her thread to pull. But she heard it and she filed it, and she understood that Han Young-soo had just told her something about his son that he probably hadn't planned to. When they reached the end of the garden path, he stopped and turned to face her fully. Thursday's dinner, he said. I'll be ready, she said. The board will look at you, he said. They will form opinions before you speak. They always do, she said. So do I. The closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him moved through his expression and disappeared. Good morning, Miss Carter, he said. Good morning, Mr. Han. She walked back to the guest house, finished her coffee, and called Jaiwon. Your father just interviewed me in the rose garden, she said when he picked up. A brief pause. How did it go? I'll tell you at breakfast, she said. Come to the guest house. And bring food. I'm not cooking for a briefing session. A pause that had something warm in its edges. Yes, ma'am, he said. She almost smiled at that. She waited until she'd hung up to actually do it. He came with food. Not delivered food, not something plucked from the main house kitchen. He came with ingredients and used her kitchen with the ease of a man who knew his way around one, which surprised her enough that she stopped pretending to review her notes and just watched for a moment. You cook, she said. My grandmother taught me. He didn't look up from what he was doing. She said a person who couldn't feed themselves was a person who was dependent on the world's goodwill, and the world's goodwill was not a reliable resource. Maya sat with that for a second. She and my grandmother would have gotten along. I think so too, he said, and said it simply like it was a thing he'd already considered. She told him about the garden conversation. He listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, turning something over. He tested you, Jaiwon said. I know. How do you feel about that? She looked at him. The question was genuine. He actually wanted to know. I feel fine about it, she said. I've been tested in rooms my whole life. The difference is I know my own score. He set a plate in front of her and met her eyes across the counter, and the morning light came through the kitchen window and did something entirely unreasonable, and neither of them said anything for a moment. He liked you, Jaiwon said finally. He respected me, Maya corrected. That's better. The look on his face told her that was exactly the right distinction and that she had impressed him by making it. She looked down at her plate so she didn't have to deal with that directly before 9 in the morning. The day was work. Real work, the kind Maya was built for. She spent the morning with Ms. O going over the Thursday dinner logistics, learning the room, understanding the seating, mapping the evening's arc the way she mapped every event. She requested the board members' profiles and read them the way she read contracts. Twice, slowly, looking for what mattered underneath what was presented. Chun Yong-soo, 63, resistant to change, respected tradition, had been on the board since Han Young-soo's early days. He needed to feel that Jaewon was his father's son, not a departure but a continuation. Park Hyun-woo, 58, numbers-driven, skeptical of anything that couldn't be quantified. He needed data and he needed to believe the person presenting it had skin in the game. She made notes in the margins of both profiles that she would turn into coaching points for Jaewon. In the afternoon, Jaewon found her in the library. She was on the rolling ladder, which she had climbed entirely for professional reasons, specifically to retrieve a book on Korean-American business culture that she'd spotted from below, when she heard him come in and stop. "There's a step stool," he said. "This is more efficient," she said, not looking down. "It's also 6 feet off the ground." "I'm aware." She found the book and tucked it under her arm and came back down the ladder and found him standing closer to the bottom than she expected, not blocking her but present, in the way of someone who had decided proximity was appropriate without making it anything other than what it was. She stepped off the last rung and he was 2 feet away and the library was quiet. "I found something," she said, holding up the book. He looked at the title and something passed through his expression. Something that might have been the fact that she had spent her afternoon reading about his world in order to show up better in it. "Maya," he said. "It's research," she said briskly, moving past him to the reading table. "Sit down. I have coaching notes." She heard something behind her that might have been the quietest laugh she'd ever encountered. She did not turn around to verify. By evening she had 3 pages of notes for him, and he had listened to all of it with the focused attention of someone who understood that being coachable was not weakness but intelligence. "Chun Yong-soo," she said, "don't lead with the new. Lead with what doesn't change. Your father's vision, the family's foundation, the 30-year track record. Then introduce the expansion as the natural next step of something already proven. He needs to feel continuity, not disruption." Jaewon nodded, making his own note. "Park Hyun-woo wants numbers, but what he actually needs is conviction. Give him the data, all of it, but deliver it like you've already seen the outcome and you're just showing him the map. Certainty is contagious." "And you?" Jaewon said. "What do you need Thursday?" She looked up. "What do you mean?" "From me," he said. "In that room. What do you need?" The question landed somewhere she hadn't expected. She had spent the entire day thinking about what he needed. The question of what she needed had not occurred to her, which told her something about the habit she'd built, the one where she organized everyone else's world and forgot she was standing in it too. She thought about it honestly. "I need you to introduce me like I belong there," she said. "Not like you're explaining me. Not like there's a story attached. Just naturally. Like there was never a question." He held her gaze. "There isn't one," he said. "For me there isn't one." The evening light was doing the thing it did and she was becoming very tired of evening light. "Okay," she said, closing her notebook. "We're ready for Thursday." "Are we?" he said, and the way he said it suggested he might not be talking entirely about Thursday. "Good night, Jaewon," she said firmly. He stood, gathered his notes and moved to the door. Paused with his hand on the frame. She was learning this was his thing, the pause at the door, the one last thing. "Thank you," he said, "for today. For the library. He stopped. "For taking this seriously." "It's serious work," she said. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." He left. She sat in the library alone with her notebook and the east wall of his grandmother's books and the very specific feeling of something growing in the space between what this was and what it was becoming. She wrote one more note. "Stay on the plan." She underlined it twice. Then she closed the notebook, turned off the library light, and walked back through the garden to the guest house, where the fountain kept its time and the climbing roses held the wall and the Georgia night was warm and entirely, inconveniently beautiful. Thursday arrived the way important days always did. Quietly, without fanfare, the morning looking like any other morning until you remembered what it contained. Maya was up at 6. She had laid out her outfit the night before, Not one of the pieces from the original rack, but something she had asked Sungjin to source on her behalf, because she had conditions, and one of them was that she picked her own clothes. It was a gown the color of deep burgundy, structured at the top with a neckline that was elegant without being conservative, falling into a skirt that moved when she moved. She had chosen it because it said exactly what she needed to say in that room. I am not an addition. I am a presence. She did her own makeup at the guesthouse mirror, taking her time, because this was armor and armor deserved attention. Her mother had taught her that. Not in those words. Her mother had sat her down at 13 and shown her the particular ritual of preparing yourself to walk into a world that was going to form its opinion of you in the first 8 seconds, and had said, you don't do this for them. You do this for the version of yourself that deserves to walk in ready. Maya had never forgotten that. She was ready by 7:30. Jaiwon knocked at 8. She opened the door and watched something happen in his face that he did not entirely manage to keep from being visible. A brief, unguarded moment of a man registering something and not having the half-second he needed to compose it away before she saw it. She let it pass, filed it, moved on. Ready? She said. He looked at her for one more moment. Yes, he said, though the way he said it suggested he was answering a slightly different question than the one she'd asked. The dinner was in the formal dining room, the one she had seen on the tour and catalogued immediately as a room designed to make a statement. Long table, high ceilings, lighting that was warm but precise, the kind of room that said we have been here a long time and we intend to continue. The board members arrived between 8:15 and 8:45, which told her immediately who felt secure enough to be late and who needed the buffer of early arrival. She stood beside Jaiwon as they came in, and she shook hands and smiled and said names back to people the moment after she heard them, which was a skill she had developed over years of events, and which consistently made people feel more significant than they expected to feel. Chun Yong-soo arrived at 8:20 with his wife, and looked at Maya with the frank assessment of a man who had been forming opinions for 63 years and saw no reason to be subtle about it. Miss Carter, he said after Jaiwon introduced her. How long have you known our Jaiwon? Our Jaiwon. She noted the possessive, the protectiveness in it. Long enough to know what he's built here deserves what comes next, she said, which answered the question without answering it and redirected to exactly the ground she needed them on. Chun Yong-soo's eyes held hers for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, in the way of a man whose opinion was shifting without his full permission. Park Hyun-woo arrived at 8:40, last, and looked at the room with the eyes of a man counting variables. He shook Maya's hand with the efficiency of someone for whom the social portion of an evening was a tax he paid to get to the numbers. She liked him for it. I hear the expansion proposal is significant, she said to him directly, cutting through the small talk he didn't want to be having. He focused on her. It is. Then I look forward to hearing it, she said. The numbers on the Buckhead corridor have been interesting for the past 18 months. He blinked. You follow commercial development? I follow everything relevant to the rooms I'm in, she said simply, and moved on before he could form the next question, leaving him with the impression of someone who had done her homework, which she had, because Maya Carter did not walk into rooms unprepared. Han Young-soo arrived last of all. He came in from the side entrance, unhurried, and the room adjusted to him the way rooms adjusted to certain people. Not loudly, not obviously, but definitively. Conversations paused and reoriented. Backs straightened slightly. The gravitational center of the evening shifted. He found Maya's eyes across the room. She held his gaze steadily and gave him the smallest nod. Not deferential, not challenging. Just acknowledgement. One professional to another. Something in his expression said he had received it correctly. Jaiwon, beside her, exhaled very quietly. She felt it more than heard it. Okay? She murmured, low enough for only him. Yes, he murmured back, and then lower still. Thank you for being here. She didn't respond, but she shifted half a step closer to him, close enough to be visible as a unit to the room, close enough that the board members who were watching, and they were all watching, registered it without having to be told what to register. She felt him register it too. The warmth of it, the deliberateness of it. She felt his posture change slightly, not loosen exactly, but settle. The way a building settled when its foundation confirmed it was solid. Dinner was 4 courses in 2 hours, and Maya worked the table the way she worked every room. Present, calibrated, saying the right thing to the right person at the right moment and knowing when the right thing was silence. She watched Jaiwon present the expansion proposal over the main course and felt something she hadn't expected. Pride. Clean and simple. He was extraordinary at this, the way he laid out complexity and made it feel like clarity, the way he fielded questions with the patience of someone who had thought harder about his own proposal than anyone in the room was capable of thinking about it in the moment. She had coached him on Chun Yong-soo. Jaiwon led with the foundation. 30 years. His father's vision. The track record that spoke for itself. And then, naturally, as the next step of something already proven, the expansion. She watched Chun Yong-soo's resistance soften in real time, watched the older man begin to nod with the rhythm of someone who was being reminded of something he already believed. She had coached him on Park Hyun-woo. Jaiwon gave him every number and delivered it with the certainty of a man who had already seen the outcome and was simply showing the map. She watched Park Hyun-woo stop calculating and start listening, which was the shift she'd been aiming for. At one point Jaiwon glanced at her across the table, just briefly, just for a half second, and she gave him nothing visible because they were in a room full of people who were watching. But she held his gaze for that half second and she put everything she meant to say in it. "You've got this. Keep going." He turned back to the board and kept going. After dinner, the men moved to the sitting room in the way that old-school business culture moved men to sitting rooms, and the wives and Maya redistributed to the adjacent lounge, which Maya had expected and prepared for because the conversations in the adjacent lounge were frequently more useful than the ones in the sitting room. Mrs. Chun was warm and curious and asked Maya about her work with genuine interest. Mrs. Park was quiet and observant and said less than anyone in the room, but Maya understood immediately that she was the one whose opinion her husband actually weighted most. Maya spoke to Mrs. Park for 11 minutes. She asked about her work. She was a landscape architect, which Maya had known from the briefing notes, and listened with genuine interest, which was not difficult because Maya was actually interested. By the end of those 11 minutes, Mrs. Park was smiling in the way of someone pleasantly surprised. Mrs. Han watched from across the room with an expression that had moved, finally and definitively, from assessment into something that was almost approval. Almost. Maya would take it. At 10:45, as the evening was concluding and coats were being retrieved and the particular warmth of a successful dinner was settling over the room, Han Young-soo found Maya near the doorway. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Han." He stood beside her and looked out at the room. His board members, his family's legacy, the evening that had gone exactly as it needed to go. "Park Hyun-woo spoke to me before dinner ended," he said. "He's moving to support the proposal." Maya said nothing. "Chun Yong-soo told me my son had good judgment," Han Young-soo continued. He paused. "He was looking at you when he said it." Maya kept her expression even. Han Young-soo turned to look at her directly. "You did that," he said. "Not the proposal. Not my son's presentation, though that was excellent. You did what you did in this room tonight, and it moved this evening." "Your son moved this evening," she said. "I just made sure the room was ready for him." Han Young-soo looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something she had not expected, in a quieter register than anything she'd heard from him yet. "He hasn't had someone in his corner in a long time," he said. "Not really. People are in his corner for what he represents. You are." He stopped. "You are something different." She met his eyes. "I'm leaving at the end of the week, Mr. Han." "I know," he said. He looked back at the room. "I'm not telling you to stay. I'm telling you what I see." A pause. "I have built things for 40 years. I know what a foundation looks like." He excused himself before she could respond, moving back into the room with the unhurried authority of a man who had said what he came to say and needed nothing after it. Maya stood in the doorway and breathed. Jaiwon appeared at her elbow 30 seconds later, and she wondered how long he had been close enough to see that exchange without being close enough to hear it. "Ready to go?" he said. "Yes," she said. They walked out into the Georgia night together and neither of them said anything for a long moment, and the silence had something alive in it. Something that was aware of itself and neither of them was quite ready to name. Friday should have been simple. The board dinner was done. The week was more than half over. Maya's job was essentially complete, and what remained was the professional courtesy of seeing the arrangement through to its agreed conclusion. 2 more days, a gracious exit, a flight to New York. Simple. What happened instead was rain. It started at noon, the kind of Georgia rain that didn't negotiate, heavy and warm and determined, turning the estate grounds into something that looked like a painting of itself, all blurred green edges and silver light. Maya was in the guest house with her laptop and her tea and a document she was updating for a client back in Atlanta, which she had been neglecting in the chaos of the week. She was fine. She was completely fine. Jaiwin knocked at 2. "I'm not interrupting," he said when she opened the door. She looked at him. He was in a dark sweater and he was holding 2 books, and he looked like a person who had decided to go somewhere specific and had ended up at her door without fully accounting for the decision. "You're interrupting," she said. "Come in." He came in and looked at her laptop and her tea and her clearly not as fine as advertised afternoon with the attention of a man who noticed things, and he set one of the books on the counter near her. She looked at it. It was from his grandmother's collection. She could tell by the slight aging of the spine, the careful quality of its preservation. "I thought you might like it," he said simply, "based on what you said the other day. About your grandmother." She looked at the book for a moment, then at him. "Sit down, Jaiwin," she said. He sat. She made more tea because it was raining and it was that kind of afternoon, and she was not going to examine the domesticity of that too closely. They sat at the kitchen counter across from each other, and the rain made its sound against the windows, and it was comfortable, which was the thing she had not been prepared for. Not charged, not professional, not the careful negotiation of 2 people in a contract arrangement. Just comfortable, like 2 people who had known each other for longer than a week. Like something that had always known what shape it wanted to take. "Tell me about New York," he said. "What about it? What are you going toward?" he said. "Not what you're leaving. What's there?" She thought about it honestly. "My cousin Diane has a room. There are firms there I've wanted to work with for years, larger events, bigger scope. I'm good at this work, and I've been doing it in a market that's too small for what I can actually do." She paused. "I want to build something that's mine. Really mine." He nodded slowly. "You will," he said. "Not I think you will. Not I'm sure you will. Just certainty. Flat and clean." "You don't know that," she said. "I know you," he said, and then stopped as if he'd heard it after he'd said it, the weight of it. "I know enough," he amended quietly. The rain intensified briefly, drumming against the guesthouse roof, and then settled back. "What about you?" she said. "When this week is done and the board is settled and the arrangement is concluded, what do you want?" He looked at her steadily. "That's the first time anyone has asked me that this week." "I know," she said. "I'm asking now." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might redirect, might give her the professional answer, the composed answer, the Han Jaiwin answer that kept everything managed and nothing exposed. Instead he said, "I want a life that feels like mine. I have built everything that was expected of me, and I did it because I believed in it and I stand by it. But I want," he stopped, "I want to come home to something real, not arranged, not strategic." He looked at his hands on the counter. "I thought I had made my peace with not having that." "What changed?" she said softly. He looked up. His eyes met hers and held them, and the answer was there, visible, not hidden the way he hid most things. Just there, in the open, asking nothing and saying everything. Maya's heart did something she told it firmly not to do. "Jaiwin," she said carefully. "I know," he said. "I know what this is. I know what we agreed." "I'm leaving Sunday," she said. "I know." "I'm not." She stopped, started again. "I've just come out of something that cost me. I'm not in a place to." "Maya." His voice was quiet and very steady. "I'm not asking you for anything. I want to be clear about that. I don't say things to create obligation. I said what I said because you asked me a real question and I owe you a real answer." He held her gaze. "What I feel is my business to manage. You don't have to do anything with it." She looked at him across the counter in the rain-gray afternoon and thought about Derek and the Egyptian cotton sheets and the 3 years she had given to someone who had been somewhere else the entire time. She thought about the $40 and the broken suitcase and the wrong car. She thought about how Jaiwan had said I felt relief to her in a rose garden on the worst morning he'd had in years. She thought about how she was leaving Sunday. I need to finish this document, she said finally. He nodded, stood, took his book and left her one on the counter. Enjoy it, he said quietly. She had good taste. He left. Maya sat in the rain-gray quiet of the guest house and pressed both palms flat on the counter and breathed. Sunday, she told herself. Sunday you go. She opened her laptop. She did not finish the document. Jiyeon found her that evening on the guesthouse terrace. Because Jiyeon had a radar for emotional weather that rivaled anything meteorological. She came with wine again. Maya was beginning to understand that Jiyeon communicated care through wine, and sat beside her without preamble. He told you, Jiyeon said. He didn't tell me anything, Maya said. Maya. A pause. He didn't say anything inappropriate, Maya said. He was. She stopped. He was honest. He's always honest, which is its own kind of problem. The best kind, Jiyeon said. I'm leaving Sunday. I know. Jiyeon. I'm not going to tell you to stay, Jiyeon said, which was almost exactly what her brother had said, and which made Maya close her eyes briefly at the genetic consistency of it. I'm just going to tell you that I have watched my brother manage everything at a distance for the past 5 years, and this week is the first time I have seen him choose to be close to something. She paused. That's all I'm going to say. They sat in the warm evening with the rain-cleaned air and the garden doing its fragrant thing and the sound of the fountain keeping time. He deserves someone who stays, Maya said quietly. Not as a decision, just as a fact. Yes, Jiyeon said. He does. Neither of them said anything else. The night was warm and the stars were out after the rain, and it was the kind of evening that had no interest in being practical. Saturday arrived, and with it, without warning, a silver Mercedes in the main driveway at 11 in the morning. Maya saw it from the garden path where she was walking with her coffee and her thoughts and the book Jaiwan had left her, which she had read half of the night before and which was extraordinary, which she had known it would be because his grandmother had had good taste. She watched the silver car, watched the door open, watched Park Suyin step out. Maya catalogued this with the professional fairness she applied to everything. Beautiful in the precise and careful way of someone who had grown up knowing they would be looked at and had made peace with it. She was small and pale and wearing something simple that cost significant money, and she stood in the driveway of the Han estate with the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was now arriving at its consequences. Ms. O appeared from the main house with the speed of someone who had been watching the driveway. Maya turned and walked back to the guest house. It was not her drama. It was not her family. She was a professional in a contracted engagement, and whatever had just arrived in that silver car was above her pay grade and outside her scope. She made it to the guest house, set her coffee down, and her phone rang. Jaiwan. She answered. I saw the car, she said. A pause. Maya. You don't owe me an explanation, she said. She's part of your life. Handle it. She's not part of my life, he said, and the quiet certainty of it stopped her. She made her choice. I have no issue with it. But I wanted you to know, I wanted you to hear from me directly, that her being here changes nothing. About this week. About anything. Maya stood in the middle of the guesthouse kitchen. Why is she here? She said. I don't know yet, he said. I'm about to find out. A pause. Will you stay in the guest house for now? I'll come to you when it's done. I'm not hiding, Jaiwan. I know you're not, he said immediately. I'm asking you to give me an hour to handle this privately. As a courtesy to you, not because of any other reason. He paused. You don't deserve to be in the middle of something that has nothing to do with you. She breathed. 1 hour, she said. Thank you. He came to the guest house in 50 minutes. She knew from his face when she opened the door that it had been a significant 50 minutes, though his face was doing its managed thing, so the significance was in the texture of his composure rather than any crack in it. She let him in, made coffee, said nothing until he was sitting and had both hands around a mug. She came back for her things, he said. Some personal items she'd left. And she wanted to, He paused. She wanted to apologize. In person. Did she? Yes. A long pause. She said she wasn't ready. That she had known for months she wasn't ready and hadn't known how to say it until she ran out of time, and the only thing left was to leave. He looked at his coffee. She said she was sorry for the way she did it. Are you? Maya said carefully. Sorry about how it happened? He thought about it honestly. I'm sorry she was in a situation where she felt she had no other option, he said. I'm sorry for the time she spent preparing for something she didn't want. That's real. He looked up. But I'm not sorry it ended. Maya held his gaze. Did seeing her change anything? No, he said, without hesitation, without drama. Just no. She nodded. She saw you, he said. From the window. She asked who you were. Maya's eyebrows rose. What did you say? Something moved in his expression. Something that was warm and deliberate. I said you were someone important, he said. I said it simply because it's simply true. Maya looked at him across the kitchen counter in the Saturday morning light and felt the particular feeling of something she was trying not to do happening anyway. Quietly, without her permission, the way water found its level regardless of the obstacles. Jaiwin, she said. Sunday, he said quietly. I know. I'm not, he stopped. Set down his mug. Maya, I need to ask you something and I need you to know that your answer doesn't change anything about how I treat you for the rest of this week. Your answer is yours and I'll respect it completely. She waited. Is there anything here? He said. For you. Not for me. I know what's here for me. But I need to know if what I feel is something that exists between us or something that only exists in me. He held her gaze. Because if it only exists in me, I'll manage it and we'll finish this week professionally and I'll put you on the plane Sunday and wish you everything good. But if it exists between us... He stopped. I'd like to know. The kitchen was very quiet. Maya thought about everything she had told herself since Wednesday. Since Tuesday. Since the rose garden on Saturday when he'd said I felt relief and she had understood that she was looking at a man who was genuinely, under all the composure and competence, trying to be honest. She thought about Sunday. She thought about New York. She thought about how she had gotten into the wrong car and ended up somewhere that felt, inexplicably, more right than anything had felt in longer than she wanted to admit. It exists between us, she said quietly. I need you to know that doesn't change my plans. He absorbed that, both parts of it. She watched him hold both parts with equal seriousness, not grabbing at the first and dismissing the second. Okay, he said. Okay? She said. You told me something true, he said. That's all I asked for. He picked up his mug. The rest is, he paused. The rest belongs to whatever comes next. And I don't know what that is. He met her eyes. But I'd rather know the truth and not know what comes next than manage a comfortable uncertainty. Maya looked at him. You are, she said, the most honest person I have ever met. Is that a problem? He said. It's inconvenient, she said. He almost smiled. I know, he said. I've been told. She packed Saturday night. It didn't take long. She had arrived with 3 broken-wheeled suitcases and she was leaving with the same, plus the book from Jaiwin's grandmother's shelf that she had not returned because he had not asked for it back and she chose to read that as permission. She set the suitcases by the guest house door and sat on the bed in the room with the good curtains and the fountain sound and thought about the week she had just lived. 1 week. That was what she had agreed to. 1 week had given her a board dinner she'd run better than anything in her portfolio. A morning in a rose garden with a patriarch who had looked at her and seen someone worth talking to. An evening on a terrace with a woman who had said you're real like it was the most significant observation. A library with a rolling ladder and books that had belonged to a woman she would never meet but somehow felt she knew. 1 week had given her Jaiwin. Not given, that was the wrong word. Nothing had been given. What had happened between them had been built, carefully, in the spaces between professionalism and something else, in honest answers to honest questions, in coffee made without asking and books left on counters and one conversation in a rain-gray afternoon that had cracked something open in her that she hadn't known needed opening. She was still going to New York. She knew that with the same certainty she knew everything important. Cleanly, without drama. New York was her plan, and her plan was good, and she had made it for reasons that were still real, Derek and the ash and the fresh start that was waiting for her in Diane's spare room. But she was going to New York differently than she had planned to. She was going knowing that something existed, that it was real, that she had said so out loud to the person it was real with, which meant it was no longer something she could pack away and pretend hadn't happened. She lay back on the linen sheets and looked at the ceiling and thought about all the things that could mean. Then she slept because she was someone who had learned to rest before transitions, and tomorrow was a transition. Jaiwan was in the garden at 7. She saw him from the kitchen window, the same place she had first seen his father, standing near the rose garden, looking at nothing in particular, his back to the guest house. He was in dark clothes, and the morning was doing its soft golden thing, and she stood with her coffee and looked at him for a moment before she went outside. He heard her on the path and turned, and his face was composed in the way she knew now meant he had been up for a while and had been composing it deliberately, which meant underneath it something was less composed. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He fell into step beside her naturally, the way they had fallen into patterns all week. Beside each other, neither leading, both present. "Sungjin has your car ready. Flight's at noon." "I know." They walked for a moment in the garden silence. "The guest house has been the most peaceful I've felt in years," she said, because it was true, and she had decided she was going to be honest today. She had learned it from him. "I want you to know that." He glanced at her. "Maya, I'm not saying it to make this harder," she said. "I'm saying it because it's true and you deserve to hear true things." She paused. "You said something to me in a rose garden last week, and I think about it more than I should. So, fair is fair." He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. The garden was all morning light and rose smell, and somewhere a bird was making its argument against silence. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I want the same thing you asked me yesterday. The answer is yours, and it doesn't change how this ends this morning." He turned to face her. "Ask." "When I'm in New York," she said. "Settled. Started. When the fresh start has actually started and I know what I'm building." She paused. "Would you want to know how it's going?" He looked at her. The composure had shifted into something more unguarded. The thing she saw in glimpses all week finally staying in place long enough to be read. "Yes," he said. "I would want to know." "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They stood in the garden in the morning light, and the air between them had the feeling of something that had been acknowledged and could not be unacknowledged, and neither of them tried to manage it away. "You're going to be extraordinary in New York," he said quietly. "I know," she said, because she did know. Because she was Maya Carter and she had always known, and the week had not changed that. It had just reminded her that knowing it was not the same as someone else seeing it clearly and saying it simply. She extended her hand. He looked at it, then at her. Something moved in his expression. He took her hand and held it. Not a handshake, just held it for a moment, the warmth of it steady and real. Then she let go. "Tell Gion I'll find her in New York," she said. "She already knows," he said. "She's been texting you her restaurant recommendations since Thursday." Maya laughed, genuinely surprised into it. "She has," she confirmed. He walked her back to the guest house, and he and Sungjin carried her suitcases to the car, and Mrs. Han was at the main house entrance when the car pulled around, which Maya had not expected, and which told her something about the week and what it had been. Mrs. Han held both of her hands briefly. Not a hug. That was not who she was, but a hold, firm and real. "You did well," Mrs. Han said, which from Han Myri was a declaration. "Thank you for having me," Maya said. She got into the car. She did not let herself look back until they were at the end of the driveway and the gates were behind her, and when she did she looked because she had earned the right to look, because she was not pretending this had been nothing. Jaiwan was standing at the end of the garden path. He raised one hand. She pressed hers briefly to the window and then faced forward and let the Han estate, the rose garden, the library with its rolling ladder, the guest house fountain, the whole impossible week become the past. Sungjin drove. The road ahead was open. New York in August was its own kind of argument. Maya walked out of a client meeting on the 42nd floor of a midtown building into heat that rose off the pavement like something personal, and she didn't mind it at all because the meeting had gone exactly the way she had needed it to go, and she was walking out with the largest contract of her career. Diane met her on the sidewalk because Diane had taken to appearing at significant moments with iced coffee, which was love in its most practical form. "Well," Diane said. "We got it," Maya said. Diane screamed in a way that made 3 pigeons and 1 businessman change their trajectories. Then she thrust the iced coffee at Maya and grabbed her free hand, and they stood on the midtown sidewalk being unreasonably happy while New York moved around them with its characteristic indifference. 3 months. 3 months since she had pressed her hand to the window of Sungjin's car. 3 months since she had arrived at Diane's apartment with 3 broken-wheeled suitcases and a book from a dead woman's library, and the particular feeling of a person who had been through something significant and come out on the other side of it more themselves than before. She had built. That was the only way to describe the past 3 months. She had built steadily and deliberately, the way she had always known she could if she had the right room and the right scale. New York had given her both. She had 2 junior coordinators working with her now. She had a client list that had grown by word of mouth faster than she had projected. She had an apartment, small, hers, with a window that actually closed, in Brooklyn that she had furnished slowly with things she chose because she liked them. She had talked to Jaiwin on the phone every Sunday. It had started the first Sunday. He had texted first, which she had not expected but had also, if she was honest, expected, because he said things he meant and he had said he wanted to know how it was going. She had called back instead of texting because she thought better in voice than in text, and also because she wanted to hear him. They talked for an hour that first Sunday. Then every Sunday after. Not about them. There was no conversation about what this was or what it was becoming, because that conversation had its time, and its time was not in carefully scheduled weekly calls while both of them were building. But the calls were real. He talked about the expansion project, which was moving forward with board approval, with the particular mix of precision and genuine engagement she had recognized in him from the board dinner. She talked about her clients, her cases, the framework she was building for something that would eventually be a real firm. He listened to her the way he looked at things, completely without rush, catching what mattered. She listened to him the same way. Jiyeon had become a fixture. They had met in person in her 3rd week in New York, at a restaurant in the West Village that Jiyeon had been insisting on via text since Thursday of the Han Estate week, and it had been 3 hours of the kind of conversation that built real friendship, the kind you knew was real because it felt like relief. "He asks about you," Jiyeon had said, that first dinner, with the specific casualness of someone not trying to seem like they were bringing it up. "I know," Maya said. "We talk Sundays." Jiyeon had looked at her with a smile that contained more information than Maya was prepared to unpack in a West Village restaurant, and had smoothly changed the subject. That had been 2 months ago. Her phone rang on a Wednesday. She was in her Brooklyn apartment, on her small balcony with the book she had nearly finished. His grandmother's book, which she had rationed because she didn't want it to be over, when the phone rang and the name on the screen was not Sunday, and her heart did its thing. She answered. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. "I'm in New York." She sat up. "You're in New York. The expansion project has a component here," he said. "I'm here for 4 days. A pause that was uncharacteristic enough to be significant. "I wanted to tell you in case I didn't want to be in the same city without you knowing." Maya looked out at the Brooklyn evening, at the slice of sky between buildings. "Are you free Thursday?" she said. "Yes," he said. Immediately. "There's a restaurant in Brooklyn that Jiyeon doesn't know about yet," she said. "I want to keep it that way." The silence on his end had warmth in it. "Yes," he said again. 7 o'clock, she said. "I'll text you the address." "Okay." "Jaiwin." "Yes." "I'm glad you called," she said. A pause. "I'm glad you answered," he said, and said it simply, the way he said everything that mattered, without decoration, without hedge, just the thing itself, clean and real. Thursday at 7 she walked into the restaurant in a dress she had chosen because she liked it, not because anyone was watching, and found him already there. He stood when she came in. He looked. She let herself look, fully, for the first time since the garden on a Sunday morning 3 months ago, like himself. Not the board dinner version, not the wedding morning version, not the managing everything version. Just Jaiwin. Dark jacket, open collar. The same quality of attention she had recognized the first time he'd knocked on a guesthouse door. "Hi," she said when she reached the table. "Hi," he said. They sat down and the restaurant was warm and unhurried and the candles on the table were the sensible kind that gave light without being theatrical about it. "You look," he started. "Don't," she said, smiling. "Good," he finished simply. "You look good, Maya." She looked at him across the table and let herself feel, without managing it, the thing that had been growing in Sunday phone calls and honest conversations and 1 week in a Georgia estate that had changed the trajectory of something she was still in the middle of understanding. "Tell me about the expansion," she said. He told her. She listened. She told him about the contract she had won yesterday, and he listened the way he always listened, completely. And when she finished he said, "I knew you would. You couldn't have known that," she said. The same thing she'd said in the guesthouse kitchen. "I know you," he said, and this time he did not amend it. She held his gaze across the table and let it be true. They ate and talked for 3 hours and the restaurant emptied around them without either of them noticing, and when the last of the other diners had gone the server came and asked gently if they needed anything else, and they looked around at the empty room and laughed at the same time, which was its own kind of answer. Outside on the Brooklyn sidewalk, the August night had cooled to something almost kind and the street was quiet in the particular way of late evenings when the city had finally paused to breathe. They stood on the sidewalk and neither of them moved toward a cab. "Walk?" she said. "Yes," he said. They walked. At some point between the restaurant and the small park 2 blocks over, his hand found hers or hers found his. She could not have said which, could not have said who moved first, only that at a certain point they were walking hand in hand in the Brooklyn night and it felt like the most natural thing that had ever happened and also like something she wanted to stop and mark somehow, note somewhere, remember precisely. "I have been thinking," he said, "about wrong cars." "Have you?" she said. "About how a thing that looks like a mistake can be the most accurate thing that ever happened to you," he said. "About how Sungjin turned the wrong way on a Tuesday morning, and I have not stopped being grateful for it." Maya looked at the park as they reached it, at the trees doing their late summer thing, heavy and dark and green. "I have a question," she said. "Ask." She stopped walking and turned to face him and he stopped too, holding her hand. Present in the full way she had learned was simply how he was, no performance, no management, just here. "When my lease is up in November," she said slowly, "I don't know what comes next. For the firm. For where I'm based. There are clients in Atlanta I've been neglecting and clients here I'm building and She stopped. "I don't know what the shape of my life looks like in 6 months." "Okay," he said, steady. "I need you to know that," she said. "Before this becomes whatever this is becoming. I'm still building. I'm not going to stop building for anything." "I know," he said. "Maya." He said her name the way he had always said it, with intention, with weight. "I have watched you build for 3 months from 4 states away, and I would not ask you to stop for anything." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you for a plan. I'm not asking you to know what November looks like. I'm asking," he paused, choosing carefully, "I'm asking if I can be in whatever it looks like. However it looks. I'll figure out the shape." She looked at him in the parklight and thought about the wrong car and the broken suitcase and the $40 and the green silk dress and the bored dinner and the rose garden and all the Sunday phone calls that had been something more than professional courtesy from the very first one. She thought about how she had gotten into a car going the wrong direction and ended up going somewhere truer than anything she had planned. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Yes, yes," she said again. "You can be in whatever it looks like." Something moved across his face that she had never seen there before. Not the composed version, not the managed version, not the brief almost smiles she had catalogued throughout a week in Georgia. Something open and unhurried and real, the face of a person who had just received something they had been careful not to want too much and had it anyway. He lifted her hand and held it with both of his and looked at her in the Brooklyn night and said nothing, because some things were finished by saying them and some things were just beginning. This was the second kind. Maya Carter stood in a park in Brooklyn on an August evening with the largest contract of her career signed that morning and her firm growing and her life genuinely, finally, fully hers, and looked at Han Jaiwin, who had found her in a wrong car on a Tuesday and had been paying attention ever since. "Walk me home," she said. "Yes," he said. They walked. Somewhere in Atlanta, In a garage that no longer belonged to anyone's past, a black luxury car sat clean and polished and ready. Sungjin kept it that way. He had a feeling it had more good decisions left in it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, leave us a comment. Also like, share and subscribe to our channel, and click on the notification bell to get notified whenever a new story is made.